The motel's fluorescent sign buzzed weakly against the desert wind, its missing letters flickering between Sunrise INN and total darkness. On the night of July 11, 2004, the Sunrise Inn off Interstate 80 in Pershing County, Nevada, was nearly empty. It was a Sunday, the kind of night when the truckers had already pushed west toward Reno and the gamblers heading east to Elko were still hours away. Inside, 29-year-old night auditor Emily Hart began her shift at 10 p.m., balancing ledgers that no one else cared about in a motel that barely made enough to keep the lights on. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, logged the arrivals from the evening, and adjusted the front desk thermostat to 68 degrees, her ritual start to every shift. At 12:37 a.m., she logged her final room check. By 1:15 a.m., she was gone. When the morning clerk arrived at 6:55 a.m., the lobby was empty. Emily's ledger lay open on the counter. Her half-empty coffee cup sat beside the motel's guest binder, lipstick print intact on the rim. "We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel." The security monitor looped the same frozen frame, a static-filled image of the front door half open to the darkness outside. Her key ring hung neatly on its hook. The cash drawer, still locked. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle, and no Emily Hart. The only anomaly was the night's deposit bag, missing $23 in small bills, an amount so trivial that even the responding deputies questioned whether it meant anything at all. Detective Warren Kell from the Pershing County Sheriff's Office arrived before sunrise. He'd worked the rural stretch of I-80 for 19 years and considered most motel disappearances to be runaway cases or lovers' quarrels that resolved by morning. But as he stood in the stale air of the Sunrise Inn lobby, the hum of the vending machines the only sound, something about the scene felt curated. Every chair pushed in, every pen aligned, every receipt balanced to the scent. Emily's meticulous nature was well known to her coworkers, yet the open front door, frozen in that single grainy frame, spoke of an interruption she hadn't chosen. Her car remained in the employee lot, dust from the previous week's windstorm still undisturbed on the hood. Her purse sat beneath the counter, containing $73 in cash, a Nevada driver's license, and a worn Polaroid of her younger brother in his high school football uniform. There was no note, no phone record of distress, no late-night call to anyone. The only electronic trace was a time-stamped log entry, 1:08 a.m., door override, room 214. Room 214 was vacant. Deputies found the door slightly ajar, the bed untouched, the bathroom light on. The guest record showed the room had been rented 3 days earlier to a trucker named David R. Lutz, who checked out Saturday morning. Fingerprint powder illuminated the usual chaos of transient life, smudges on doorknobs, glass rings on the nightstand, but one print stood out. It belonged to Emily. She'd had no reason to enter the room after cleaning staff finished turnover that afternoon. A security keycard registered to the front desk had unlocked 214 at precisely 1:08 a.m., the same moment the log entry appeared. Detective Kell began his investigation with methodical simplicity. He interviewed the cook at the diner across the parking lot, who'd seen Emily around midnight bringing him change for the jukebox. He talked to the overnight gas station attendant who remembered a white security SUV idling near the motel's dumpster around 1 a.m. The vehicle matched the description of the patrol rigs used by Desert Watch Security, the private company contracted to monitor businesses along the interstate. The shift schedule for that weekend listed one officer on duty for the area, Brian Cooper, 42, former military, now employed by Desert Watch for 8 years. Cooper told detectives he'd driven through the Sunrise Inn lot around 12:50 a.m., noticed nothing unusual, and continued toward Lovelock for his next patrol. His vehicle's onboard GPS, however, showed the engine idling behind the motel for 14 minutes. When questioned, he claimed he'd stopped to check a flat tire. The maintenance logs from Desert Watch later revealed no service call for that date. The discrepancy was noted, but not pursued. There was no evidence linking Cooper to Emily's disappearance. The case went cold within months. Over the next year, rumors drifted through Pershing County like the dust storms that swallowed the horizon each spring. Some said Emily had run off with a trucker. Others whispered about a gambling debt in Reno or a married boyfriend she'd planned to meet that night. Her family, still living in Ely, plastered missing person flyers along every gas station from Battle Mountain to Fernley. None were removed by police. They simply faded in the sun until the paper turned brittle and the tape peeled away. The Sunrise Inn changed owners in 2006. The old security system was replaced, the carpets torn out, the sign repaired to finally spell sunrise again. Guests came and went, unaware that a woman had vanished from the lobby without a sound. Her disappearance lived only in local memory, and the single box of evidence labeled Hart, stored in the basement of the sheriff's office, gathering dust beside unsolved burglaries and wildlife poaching reports. 15 years later, in March 2019, the Nevada Cold Case Task Force began digitizing dormant files statewide. Emily Hart's case resurfaced not because of new evidence, but because a new detective, Kara Mendoza, refused to let the algorithm mark it low priority. She'd grown up in Lovelock, driven past the sunrise in countless times, and remembered her mother saying, "That poor girl, she just vanished right out of thin air." Mendoza requested the evidence box and found inside the brittle keycard logs, faded photographs, and an envelope marked receipts, buffet comp. Inside were two items that hadn't been scanned in the original 2004 report: a comped buffet ticket from the Silver Mesa Casino dated July 11, 2004, 1:37 a.m., and a guest ledger entry listing Room 214, authorized comp. The motel had no restaurant and no authority to issue casino comps. The handwriting authorizing it belonged unmistakably to Emily Hart. The casino, located 38 miles away, was owned by the same conglomerate that contracted Desert Watch security. Surveillance archives from 2004 had long been erased, but billing records remained. One employee ID had processed the comp that night: Brian Cooper. Mendoza's pulse quickened as she cross-checked employment rosters. Cooper had retired in 2011, moved to Henderson, and opened a small locksmith business. When she contacted the state lab to re-examine the evidence, the technician noticed something overlooked in 2004. The adhesive residue on the back of Emily's missing person flyer matched the same industrial glue used on Desert Watch's patrol decals. That clue alone meant little, but paired with Cooper's proximity and the unauthorized comp, it became the first real lead in 15 years. A warrant was quietly issued for a DNA sample. Cooper's discarded coffee cup from a Henderson diner matched touch DNA recovered from the keycard of room 214, microscopic skin cells trapped in the plastic's grain since 2004. The statistical probability of coincidence was 1 in 2.1 billion. When deputies arrived at Cooper's workshop on June 6, 2019, he was repairing a padlock, humming along to a country station. The arrest was quiet, almost polite. In interviews, he denied involvement, insisting he'd been framed or that the DNA transfer was secondary contamination from years of handling security equipment. But when investigators presented the buffet receipt, his composure cracked. He admitted he'd issued the comp to Emily as a favor after she complained about working nights, then contradicted himself by saying he'd never met her in person. He requested a lawyer and ended the interview. Excavation began 2 weeks later behind the defunct Desert Watch garage outside Lovelock, where ground-penetrating radar showed irregular soil density beneath a concrete pad poured in 2005. The remains were found 4 feet below, wrapped in motel linen still bearing the faded Sunrise Inn logo. Dental records confirmed identity. Emily Hart had been less than 20 yards from the highway that carried thousands of travelers past her resting place for 15 years. The town's reaction mixed horror and vindication. The Sunrise Inn shuttered permanently within months. The new owners of Desert Watch issued a statement of condolence but denied responsibility. Former employees remembered Cooper as helpful and professional, a man who fixed things others broke. The trial revealed a pattern of harassment complaints from female motel clerks ignored by management, citing Cooper's seniority and military background as reasons for leniency. The buffet receipt, once an irrelevant scrap of paper, became the prosecution's centerpiece, a time-stamped bridge between opportunity and evidence. During sentencing, Detective Mendoza sat in the back row, thinking about how many other boxes sat unopened in state storage. The judge's gavel echoed like a closing door when the verdict was read: guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Cooper stared ahead, expressionless, as if calculating the hours between patrol stops. Outside, reporters gathered in the desert wind, their voices carried off toward the empty interstate where the neon S still flickered weakly, one letter short of the word sunrise. The desert never forgets, Detective Mendoza reminded herself each morning. Things buried out here have a way of coming back, sometimes bones, sometimes memories, sometimes lies too heavy to stay hidden. After the arrest of Brian Cooper, Pershing County transformed overnight from an anonymous stop on the interstate into the epicenter of national fascination. News vans parked along the frontage road where tumbleweeds once rolled unchallenged. Journalists with pressed suits and windblown hair stood in front of the cracked Sunrise Inn sign, describing in solemn tones how a woman had vanished from a locked lobby while her killer patrolled just outside. Locals called it the curse of the desert. You can build a new motel, pave new roads, repaint every sign, but you can't paint over what happened here. Inside the sheriff's office, Mendoza began reconstructing the case from the ground up. The cold case files were complete but inconsistent. Old dictation notes recorded on microcassette, photographs stuck together from heat damage, evidence logs written in different hands. She built a digital timeline that spanned 2 decades, every interview, every false lead, every forgotten report. Cooper's name appeared more times than she expected, not as a suspect, but as a casual mention in incident logs where he'd assisted deputies, given statements, or offered security observations. He had positioned himself at the edges of authority for years, wearing the badge of a contractor that looked official enough to invite trust yet thin enough to avoid scrutiny. What unsettled Mendoza most was the motel's digital keycard system. In 2004, it was a prototype model purchased used from a Reno convention vendor. Its firmware had been updated only once, weeks before Emily Hart vanished. The system logged every entry, but the data was stored on a removable floppy disk, replaced daily and labeled by hand. The July 11th disk had been preserved, its magnetic surface degraded but still readable after careful restoration. Mendoza spent nights in her office scrolling line by line through raw data, the green text on her monitor bleeding into her dreams. At 1:08 a.m., the line read, "Override access 214, AUTH code 0046. Cross-referenced against the staff directory, that code belonged not to Emily Hart, but to the security supervisor for the region, Brian Cooper. That discovery reframed everything. Cooper hadn't simply encountered Emily by chance. He had access privileges no motel employee could override. His code shouldn't have worked at the Sunrise Inn, a separate contract zone, yet somehow it did. Someone higher up had granted him system-wide authority years earlier, and no one had questioned it because no one cared. Cheap security for cheap motels. Mendoza traced the authorization back to an IT vendor that dissolved in 2006, its records stored on an obsolete server now housed in a state archive warehouse outside Carson City. A week later, standing under flickering fluorescent lights among rows of boxed hard drives, she found the audit trail, a maintenance ticket filed June 30, 2004, requesting temporary master key access for field supervisor, Cooper B. The authorization had been approved by a regional manager named Gregory Sims. He died in 2015. The dead could not be cross-examined, but their paperwork could. Sims's signature confirmed that Cooper's override wasn't an accident, it was company-sanctioned. He could open any door in the corridor of Nevada's forgotten motels. For Mendoza, the pattern became obvious, an invisible network of unchecked power operating beneath the illusion of security. Emily's mother, Janet Hart, arrived in Pershing County for the first time in 15 years to attend the pretrial hearing. Time had whittled her voice into something brittle but steady. She wore the same gold chain Emily had given her for Mother's Day in 2003, its clasp repaired twice but never replaced. When she met Mendoza, her first question wasn't about Cooper's guilt but about Emily's final moments. Was she scared? Janet asked. Mendoza wanted to lie, to offer the comfort of ignorance, but honesty had carried the case this far. "I think she tried to stay calm," she said quietly. "She was meticulous. People like that fight by thinking." Janet nodded, her eyes fixed somewhere behind the detective, on the horizon only mothers can see. The district attorney built the case on 3 pillars: DNA evidence from the keycard, the forged buffet comp linking Cooper to Emily after her disappearance, and the recovered linens used to wrap her remains. But the most chilling piece of evidence came from a chance discovery by a maintenance crew demolishing the old Desert Watch garage. Beneath the layer of concrete where Emily's body had been found, investigators uncovered an identical security keycard encoder, the portable device used to reprogram room access cards. It bore the serial number assigned to the Sunrise Inn's replacement unit, reported lost 3 days after Emily vanished. The fingerprints on its battery compartment matched Cooper's right thumb. Defense attorneys argued contamination, coincidence, and procedural decay from a 15-year gap. They claimed the motel's records were unreliable, that the DNA transfer could have occurred through shared equipment, that Cooper's confession to issuing a comp wasn't an admission but a misunderstanding of corporate policy. Mendoza attended every hearing, her presence a silent reminder that persistence had resurrected this case. During recesses she studied Cooper, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He never looked toward the victim's mother. When asked directly whether he killed Emily Hart, his answer was almost mechanical: "I don't remember her that way." Behind the scenes, Mendoza continued investigating the missing $23 from the deposit bag. Most considered it irrelevant, but she couldn't let it go. Financial logs showed no shortfall in the motel's books. The money had been replaced before morning, the drawer balancing perfectly when the day clerk arrived. Only one person could have corrected it: someone with early access to the safe. Desert Watch's service agreement included routine cash verification for small businesses. Cooper's signature appeared on multiple reports in 2003 and 2004, authorizing end-of-shift verification, even though he wasn't a bank courier. Mendoza believed the missing $23 had never been theft. It was bait, a test to see whether anyone noticed, a prelude to something darker. When the trial opened in 2020, the courtroom filled with both spectators and ghosts. Former deputies, motel employees, and travelers who'd once passed through Sunrise packed the benches. The prosecutor, a stoic woman named Lydia Moore, framed her opening statement around a single phrase: "She didn't disappear. She was removed." The jury listened to every procedural detail: the malfunctioning camera, the override code, the unauthorized buffet receipt, as if decoding a blueprint of deception. Forensic experts explained how adhesive residues linked Cooper's vehicle decals to the missing person flyers, creating a poetic symmetry, the killer helping to post his own wanted sign. Mendoza testified on the fourth day. Her voice, steady but low, carried the quiet authority of someone who had lived with the case long enough to understand its gravity. She described the process of recovering the floppy disk, the restoration of corrupted data, the moment the authorization code revealed Cooper's access. Defense attorneys attempted to discredit her expertise, suggesting confirmation bias and emotional attachment to the case. But Mendoza countered with precision: every statement sourced, every method documented. When asked why she'd pursued a 15-year-old case when others had given up, she answered simply: because it was solvable. Outside, the desert wind carried sand against the courthouse steps, erasing footprints faster than photographers could take them. The trial lasted 17 days. On the 18th, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Cooper showed no visible reaction as the clerk read the charges. Janet Hart closed her eyes. Mendoza looked down at her notes, not from relief but from exhaustion that felt older than her years. In the months following the verdict, the state exhumed several other properties once maintained by Desert Watch. No additional victims were found, but evidence suggested Cooper had used his patrol routes to exploit isolation: motels, truck stops, maintenance depots, places where the transient and the invisible met. His conviction became a case study in criminology courses, labeled the Sunrise Paradigm: how administrative oversight and rural indifference create perfect conditions for predation. By late 2020, the Sunrise lot had been bulldozed. A chain-link fence surrounded the empty space where travelers once slept, and weeds began reclaiming the concrete. Local legend transformed Emily Hart into both warning and symbol. Truckers left plastic flowers by the highway sign, and true crime forums dissected every known detail, filling in the silences with speculation. Mendoza avoided those forums. She'd spent enough nights with ghosts to know that stories grow where facts end. But one detail remained unresolved: the keycard itself. During evidence cataloging, technicians noticed faint etching along its edge, the numbers 21,404 carved by hand, likely after manufacturing. The digits corresponded neither to a room nor a date, but to a badge serial from Desert Watch's master logbook. Cooper's badge. It suggested he'd personalized the tool of his crime, leaving behind a calling card disguised as routine equipment. Whether it was arrogance or a need to be remembered, Mendoza couldn't decide. In her final report, she wrote, "Emily Hart's disappearance illustrates the danger of normalized authority. When oversight fades, routine becomes camouflage. The killer wore compliance like a uniform." The report circulated through law enforcement circles, praised for its precision and restraint. But for Mendoza, closure was an illusion. The desert had given up its secret, yet the silence afterward felt heavier than before. On the first anniversary of the verdict, Janet Hart returned to Pershing County one last time. At sunrise she stood beside the newly placed memorial plaque near mile marker 143, where the motel once stood. Mendoza joined her briefly, offering coffee from a thermos. The wind was gentle that morning, carrying the scent of sage and asphalt. Janet traced the engraved words with her finger, in memory of Emily Rose Hart, 1975 to 2004. Never vanished. Never forgotten. She hated working nights, Janet said softly. Said the desert sounded like the ocean if you listened long enough. Mendoza nodded, hearing it too, the endless patient whisper of sand shifting over concrete. The sound of things being covered and uncovered, again and again. When the sun climbed over the mountains, light struck the plaque, turning the metal letters pale gold. Mendoza closed her notebook for the last time. Somewhere behind them, a truck engine groaned to life, its tires crunching over the gravel lot before merging onto the highway. The dust settled slowly, then disappeared. The motel was gone, but the story remained, an echo preserved in every case file, every photograph, every cautionary lecture that began with a single line. In the summer of 2004, at a motel off Interstate 80, a night auditor named Emily Hart finished her shift, and never made it to morning. When the verdict became official, the air in Pershing County seemed to change. The desert wind carried less grit, the mornings less weight. But beneath the headlines and televised relief, quiet dissonance lingered. For those who had lived through Emily Hart's disappearance, the truth didn't erase the years of silence. It only replaced one kind of uncertainty with another. The sheriff's office archived the case file with the word closed stamped in red ink across the cover, but Detective Kara Mendoza couldn't bring herself to move on. The case might have been legally complete, but she knew closure was a myth, especially in towns that made legends out of their ghosts. Her persistence led her to the state archives again, this time not as an investigator searching for evidence, but as a historian cataloging patterns. She'd requested every Desert Watch security report from 1998 through 2006, convinced that Cooper's predatory habits didn't start, or end, with Emily Hart. The reports arrived in cardboard boxes stamped property of Nevada Business Licensing Board, each filled with handwritten patrol logs on carbon copy forms. She read through hundreds of them, tracing Cooper's signature across years of night shifts that stretched from Winnemucca to Fallon. His handwriting never wavered, clean, angular, deliberate, a soldier's precision carried into civilian monotony. By the third box, Mendoza began noticing something. Every time Cooper's name appeared, so did an anomaly, a broken camera, a missing invoice, an unlocked storage unit, a complaint that went unresolved. Individually, they were minor. Collectively, they mapped a pattern of presence without consequence. He'd been there when things went missing, when women reported being followed, when motel guests claimed to see headlights idling too long in parking lots. None of those incidents had escalated into official crimes, but together they formed a constellation of warning signs invisible to anyone who wasn't looking backward through time. Mendoza prepared a supplemental report, not for prosecution but for the record. She titled it The Peripheral Pattern and sent copies to the State Attorney General, the Department of Public Safety, and the Nevada Commission on Private Security. Most agencies responded with polite acknowledgments and no further comment. One email from a retired state investigator simply said, "Some men hide in the middle of the paperwork." She printed that sentence and taped it above her desk. By late 2021, the motel lot remained an open scar on the landscape. A temporary fence surrounded it, and a faded sign warned "No trespassing, county property." Teenagers still ignored the sign at night, filming videos for the internet, daring each other to walk across the cracked foundation where the lobby once stood. Their flashlights cut through dust and silence, illuminating shards of glass that glittered like embedded stars. The Sunrise Inn had become an urban legend, a destination for those drawn to tragedy disguised as adventure. Locals shook their heads at it, but no one stopped them. Even in ruin, the motel made the county money through curiosity. Janet Hart didn't return after the first anniversary. She sent Mendoza a handwritten letter instead, neat cursive on lined stationery. "I sold the house in Ely," it read. "There's nothing left there but boxes and ghosts. I'm moving to Oregon to be near my son. If there are other mothers waiting for the same call I waited for, please don't let them wait as long as I did." The letter ended with a short postscript. "I keep her photo on my kitchen counter. Every night before I turn off the light, I tell her she can rest now." Mendoza kept that letter folded in the pocket of her case binder. Some nights she took it out and read it before going home, a ritual that reminded her why details mattered. The months that followed brought a series of quiet reckonings. The Pershing County Sheriff's Department initiated a full audit of its cold case archive, uncovering dozens of evidence boxes mislabeled or misfiled. Two additional disappearances from the early 2000s, both dismissed at the time as runaway cases, were reopened after similarities emerged. One involved a casino housekeeper last seen after a shift near Fernley in 2002, the other, a waitress from a truck stop outside Battle Mountain in 2005. Both had been working in facilities patrolled by Desert Watch security. Both had missing person flyers printed by the same company that supplied Desert Watch's decals. The DNA analysis on recovered items was inconclusive, degraded by time and heat, but the procedural overlap was undeniable. The Attorney General's office ordered an independent review of Desert Watch's operational history. Investigators discovered that Cooper had served as the unofficial trainer for new recruits, often rewriting patrol schedules and assigning coverage zones without oversight. He'd effectively built his own map of Nevada's forgotten spaces, controlling where guards went and when. Every empty stretch of highway, every motel parking lot, every unlit rest stop had been part of his self-made territory. The inquiry unearthed another detail that chilled Mendoza. The software used by Desert Watch's patrol tracking system had been programmed to delete logs older than 30 days. The digital trail of a decade of movements was gone, erased automatically, with no backups. For all intents and purposes, Cooper's nightly routes had dissolved into data dust long before anyone thought to preserve them. The system had been efficient by design, a perfect accomplice for a man who understood that bureaucracy forgets faster than people do. By the time the Commission released its final report, Desert Watch had already been dissolved. Its remaining assets were sold, its contracts reassigned, its name absorbed into a new corporation headquartered in Phoenix. Publicly, the company issued condolences. Privately, they scrubbed every trace of the brand from signage and marketing. But the county couldn't erase the memory of a uniform that once symbolized safety. When Mendoza walked into a gas station wearing her badge, customers still glanced twice, making sure the logo wasn't the old one. One night in early spring, Mendoza drove the length of I-80 from Lovelock to Reno, retracing the path Emily Hart might have driven if she'd ever made it home. The desert stretched endless and indifferent on both sides, mile markers ticking like a metronome of lost time. Near mile 143, she pulled over at the gravel turnout that overlooked the empty motel lot. The air was sharp, the stars brilliant and cold. She killed the engine, stepped out, and listened. The silence was absolute until the wind rose, carrying a low hum that sounded almost electrical. She walked the perimeter of the fence, flashlight scanning across broken concrete and patches of stubborn sage. Near the center of what had been the lobby floor, something caught the light, a small metallic glint half buried in the dust. She crouched, brushed away the sand, and uncovered a brass key fob engraved with 3 letters, ERH Emily Rose Hart. The engraving was shallow, amateur, as if carved with a pocket knife. She turned it over. The reverse side bore another etching, rough but legible, "You're safe now." Mendoza bagged it carefully and logged it the next morning, though she doubted it would change the case. Forensics later determined the fob's manufacture date to be post-2019. Someone had placed it there after the verdict. Whether it was a family member, a local memorial gesture, or something stranger, no one claimed responsibility. For Mendoza, the discovery felt like punctuation, an unplanned period at the end of a sentence that refused to end itself. Her colleagues urged her to take leave, to rest. She did briefly, traveling to visit her sister in Carson City. But rest didn't come. She found herself checking old case files online, reading transcripts, studying patterns of other small-town disappearances across the western states. Every case she opened seemed to echo the same architecture: an isolated workplace, an authority figure trusted by routine, and an administrative system too disorganized to notice the gaps. The names changed, but the rhythm didn't. In July 2022, exactly 18 years after Emily Hart's disappearance, Mendoza was invited to speak at the Western Law Enforcement Symposium in Salt Lake City. Her presentation, titled Vanishing Points: Revisiting Rural Cold Cases in the Data Age, began with a single sentence projected on the screen: "A locked door means nothing if the key is in the wrong hands." She spoke without notes, guiding the audience through the anatomy of neglect, how staffing shortages, outdated technology, and misplaced trust conspired to create perfect conditions for unsolved crimes. She ended by showing a photo of the motel sign before it fell apart, the missing letter flickering between light and dark. "The people we lose," she said, "are never entirely gone. They remain where the systems failed them." The room was silent when she finished. Back in Nevada, the highway kept moving. Truckers who'd driven that route for decades noticed a new roadside marker near mile 143, sponsored by the State Victims Assistance Program. It bore a small solar light powered by the desert sun, glowing softly through the night. Drivers said it looked like a lighthouse for the lost, a reminder that someone had finally been found. Months later, Mendoza received a package at the station. No return address, just her name typed neatly on the label. Inside was a plastic evidence sleeve containing an old photograph of the sunrise in lobby, taken years before Emily's disappearance. In the far corner of the photo, almost imperceptible, stood a man in a security uniform, face half-turned toward the camera. The accompanying note read, "He wasn't the only one." Mendoza stared at the image for hours. It wasn't Cooper. The build was wrong, the hairline different, the patch on the shoulder slightly altered. She traced the photo's edges, looking for any indication of its source, but found none. The metadata was stripped, the paper aged beyond dating. Whether it was a hoax or a message, she couldn't tell. But the thought that Cooper had been part of something larger lodged itself in her mind like a splinter she couldn't remove. She filed the photo as an anonymous submission and logged the note as evidence, though no new case was opened. Officially, the state considered the matter resolved. Unofficially, Mendoza began a new folder on her desktop labeled Sunrise Echo. It contained the photograph, the anonymous note, and a single document titled "If there's one, there's always another." By winter, the desert was quiet again. Snow dusted the mountains, and the air turned thin and brittle. Mendoza drove the highway one final time that year, slowing as she passed the memorial. The solar light blinked faintly in the darkness, a pulse in the emptiness. She thought of Emily Hart behind her desk, ledger open, coffee cooling beside her hand. A woman doing everything right, trusting the locks, trusting the system, trusting the uniform that smiled at her through the glass. The desert forgets nothing, Mendoza thought. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. Winter in Pershing County has its own kind of silence. It's not the stillness of peace but the pause between storms, the hush before the wind changes direction. In early 2023, the snow settled in thin, uneven lines across the desert floor like scars that refused to heal. Detective Kara Mendoza stood outside the sheriff's office, breath fogging against the morning air, watching the distant highway pulse with headlights that came and went without memory. 2 decades after Emily Hart's disappearance, the story refused to die. Not in headlines, not in rumor, and certainly not in Mendoza's mind. The anonymous photograph had become her new fixation. She'd memorized every pixel, the grainy carpet pattern, the outdated brass desk lamp, the figure half-turned toward the camera wearing a uniform similar but not identical to Desert Watch. She'd compared the patch insignia against every known iteration of the company's logo and found no match. The patch depicted a silver star encircled by a ring of text too blurred to read. Desert Watch's emblem had always been a gold shield. The uniform wasn't theirs, or not entirely. The distinction gnawed at her. Someone had gone to the trouble of crafting a uniform close enough to be trusted, but altered enough to evade identification. She began reaching out to old motel managers, property owners, anyone who had contracted private security during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Most didn't remember details, and many were long dead or retired. Records were sparse, paper dissolved by time and neglect. But a former night clerk from a rest-stop motel near Ely recalled something peculiar. There was another outfit before Desert Watch, he said over the phone. Called themselves SafeSpan or Sapphire, something like that. Blue patches, not gold. Same kind of vehicles though. Same guys, maybe. Mendoza checked the Nevada Business Registry. No listing for SafeSpan or anything similar existed under current or dissolved entities. Yet one archived filing caught her attention. SafeSpan Services LLC, registered 1996, revoked 2001. Its listed owner, Gregory Sims, the same regional manager who later authorized Cooper's master key access. The connection drew a straight line backward through time, a thread that ran from the Sunrise in murder to a forgotten corporation whose records should have vanished 20 years earlier. She pulled everything the state archives still had: articles of incorporation, licensing forms, tax records. SafeSpan had been headquartered in Sparks, Nevada, operating primarily in rural motel and construction site contracts. The company dissolved shortly before Desert Watch was founded. The paperwork suggested a transfer of assets, but no explicit sale. In the space between those two entities, SafeSpan and Desert Watch, lay a 5-month gap where dozens of employees had disappeared from payroll without formal termination. Mendoza suspected Cooper had been among them, possibly carrying his role straight into the new company under Sims's supervision. If Sims had built both entities, it meant Desert Watch wasn't just a business, it was an evolution. A rebrand born out of scandal, perhaps one never reported. Mendoza requested any labor complaints filed against SafeSpan during its existence. Only one surfaced, a 1999 sexual harassment allegation by a motel clerk in Elko County. The claimant's name was Melissa Dunn. The case was dropped after she failed to appear at a hearing. No follow-up, no investigation. Mendoza searched public records and found that Melissa Dunn had been reported missing 6 weeks later. The discovery hit like a physical blow. Another woman, same region, same pattern, isolated workplace, night shift, vague disappearance. The missing person report listed SafeSpan Security as the responding agency. The signature on the response form belonged to a field officer named B. Cooper. Mendoza closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. The air in her office felt suddenly thin, recycled and stale. Emily Hart had never been Cooper's first victim. She might not even have been his last. The next morning, she reopened the file under a new classification: Interlinked Cases, Rural Female Disappearances, 1996 to 2004. She traced every missing person report within that time frame that matched the same parameters. Female, ages 20 to 35, employed at isolated businesses, last contact after midnight. There were 12. Some had been explained away, runaways, accidents, transient workers, but each bore the fingerprints of neglect. In 4 of them, Desert Watch or its predecessor had been listed as the first to respond. When Mendoza presented her findings to the district attorney, he listened carefully, then sighed. "We can't try a dead man twice," he said, referring to Cooper, who had died in state custody in December 2022 from heart failure. "We've got no physical evidence tying him to these other cases. What do you want me to do, exhume ghosts?" "I want them acknowledged," Mendoza replied. "They deserve at least that." The DA nodded, sympathetic but practical. "Make it a report. We'll file it with the state cold case unit." It wasn't enough, but it was something. Mendoza began assembling a comprehensive dossier, cross-referencing every incident. The more she read, the clearer the architecture became. SafeSpan's disappearance had been no coincidence. Sims had quietly restructured it into Desert Watch after losing insurance coverage due to multiple internal complaints. The name change had wiped the slate clean. Cooper and others like him had simply swapped uniforms and kept working. The system had rewarded their silence. Her investigation uncovered one last administrative oddity. SafeSpan's final quarterly expense report from 2001 listed a personnel training facility in Winnemucca, an address that now belonged to an abandoned gas station off Route 95. Curious, Mendoza drove there one afternoon, the desert sun bleaching the world to bone and gold. The building was half collapsed, its roof sagging like a tired breath. Inside, dust coated everything. Faded posters on the wall depicted emergency procedures, faded slogans, "Safety never sleeps," and a whiteboard filled with handwritten codes, 214, 308, 441. Room numbers. She photographed everything. Behind the counter, in a rusted filing cabinet, she found a binder sealed in plastic. The front label read Training, Field Operations. Inside were pages of orientation materials, all printed with the SafeSpan logo. Near the back, stapled to an attendance sheet, was a photograph of the 1999 trainee class. 12 men in uniform stood in front of a row of patrol vehicles. In the center of the group, arms folded, was Gregory Sims. On the far right, slightly apart from the others, stood Brian Cooper. But what froze Mendoza's breath wasn't Cooper, it was the man beside him. The same man from the anonymous photograph, same posture, same blurred insignia. The name written under the photo read F. Merritt. She flipped to the attendance sheet and found the signature, Franklin Merritt. Employment records confirmed he'd worked for SafeSpan from 1999 until the company's dissolution in 2001. After that, no trace. No tax records, no forwarding address, no obituary. He'd vanished like the others. Mendoza returned to her office and began digging. Merritt had no criminal record, no family ties in Nevada, and no social media presence. The only mention she found was a brief notice in the Winnemucca Herald from August 2001, local security officer missing, foul play not suspected. The article claimed he'd left town abruptly, citing personal reasons. The byline belonged to a young reporter named Daniel R. Kerr, now an investigative journalist based in Denver. She called him the next day. "You wrote about a missing security officer back in 2001, she began. There was a pause, then a weary chuckle. "You mean the ghost story?" "Yeah, I remember. Cops told me he skipped town after a bad breakup." "Why?" "I think he might have been part of something bigger," she said. Kerr hesitated. "Funny you mention that. A week after I printed that story, someone broke into my office and stole the notes. Only thing they took. I always figured it was just small-town drama." "Do you remember what the notes said?" "Just that he'd been acting strange, kept telling coworkers he'd found something buried out near the highway, said he was going to tell Sims about it. Next thing, he's gone. No one looked for him. Guess we both know how that turned out." When the call ended, Mendoza sat motionless. Merritt had found something, maybe a body, maybe evidence of earlier crimes. Whatever it was, it had vanished with him. If Cooper had learned anything from his mentor Sims, it was how to erase. The next week, Mendoza submitted a request to reopen the Merritt disappearance as a connected case. The sheriff approved it reluctantly. She assembled a small search team and returned to the abandoned training site with ground-penetrating radar. 2 days into excavation, they found what they hadn't expected: not human remains, but a buried steel drum, sealed and rusted, containing reels of 8mm film. The labels read Field Assessment, 1999. The footage, once digitized, showed SafeSpan trainees performing staged patrol scenarios. The images were silent but clear: simulated break-ins, staged assaults, emergency drills. At first, it looked routine. But halfway through one reel, a scene appeared that wasn't part of any training. The camera panned across a dim motel hallway, then toward a woman sitting on the floor, blindfolded. 2 men stood nearby, Sims and Cooper. Behind them, a third figure held the camera. The patch on his shoulder matched the one from the anonymous photograph. The blurred star encircled by unreadable text. The recording ended abruptly. Mendoza felt the same chill she'd experienced years ago when she'd first opened Emily Hart's file. Whatever SafeSpan had been, it hadn't been a security company in the traditional sense. It had been a front, something built to give predators access and authority. And now, through a few reels of film, the past had resurfaced, demanding to be seen. As night fell over Pershing County, Mendoza locked the film reels in evidence storage and wrote a single note in her report: "The story isn't over." It never was. The next morning the desert was gray and metallic, clouds hanging low enough to touch the hills. Detective Kara Mendoza sat in the evidence viewing room with a laptop and a portable film scanner, each reel of 8mm film carefully labeled a marker that had faded to ghost lines. The old projector had burned out the previous night, so she watched the digitized footage frame by frame, pausing when movement blurred into something human. The first reel ended where she'd left off, a woman blindfolded, her hands bound loosely, Sims and Cooper standing behind her. The camera panned abruptly to a wall where a clock read 2:47 a.m. in red LED numerals. Then static. The second reel began with a motel room. Not the Sunrise Inn, different layout, different wallpaper. A man in a SafeSpan uniform dragged a folding chair into frame. The badge number on his chest was M22. He placed the chair against the wall, adjusted it twice, and left. The camera stayed on the empty chair for nearly 2 minutes before the frame darkened. No voices, no sound, just the mechanical whir of a handheld recorder. Reel 3 was worse. The lens wobbled, refocused on a dim corridor lined with doors, each marked with tape instead of numbers. A female voice said something muffled, pleading maybe. Cooper's profile passed across the frame, his expression blank, clinical. Then another face appeared, Merritt. He was younger, nervous, glancing toward the camera as if uncertain whether he should be there. He mouthed something, impossible to hear. The frame froze there, his eyes locked with the viewer, before the film ended in white flare. Mendoza stopped the playback. She sat in silence, fingers pressed against her temples. This wasn't training footage. It was documentation, ritualistic in precision. The absence of sound made it worse. Imagination filled the blanks with echoes. She ejected the reels and slid them into evidence bags, labeling them under the Merritt case number. That night, she drove to her apartment and left the lights off. Through the window, the horizon was a smear of sodium orange, the highway humming like a living thing. She thought of Merritt, the missing trainee who had found something buried. Maybe he'd found these films. Maybe he'd filmed them. Maybe he'd tried to expose something larger than Cooper and paid for it. 2 days later, the State Crime Lab confirmed the authenticity of the film stock, manufactured between 1998 and 2000. The adhesive on the reels matched industrial-grade tape used by the SafeSpan training facility. One frame contained a reflection in a mirror, an incidental capture of the cameraman. Digital enhancement brought the face into focus. It wasn't Sims. It wasn't Cooper. It was Merritt. The realization changed everything. The man who'd filmed the footage was the same man who vanished in 2001. He hadn't been documenting crimes, he'd been gathering evidence. A whistleblower, not an accomplice. Somewhere along the line, he must have realized what he was recording wasn't simulation but reality. Mendoza compiled a new report titled The Merritt Footage, Unverified Field Operations, 1999 to 2000. She included every still frame, every timestamp. The Attorney General's office ordered an immediate review, and the reels were transported to Carson City under armed escort. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and the footage leaked before the review began. Someone inside the chain of custody uploaded compressed clips to an online forum popular among amateur sleuths. Within 48 hours, the SafeSpan tapes became a viral phenomenon. True crime channels dissected every second, conspiracy theorists claimed government cover-ups, local news outlets replayed blurred stills with sensational captions. The county sheriff's phone lines were jammed for days. For Mendoza, the leak was catastrophic. The public had reduced real victims to spectacle. Every comment section filled with speculation about who the blindfolded woman was, what had happened to her, whether she'd been Emily Hart or someone else. The noise drowned the truth. The department placed Mendoza on administrative leave pending investigation into the leak. She wasn't the source, but she understood why they needed a scapegoat. She spent the next month at home, restless, staring at the ceiling while the internet turned evidence into entertainment. The desert outside her window felt closer each night, pressing in through the silence. During that suspension, an email arrived from an address she didn't recognize, fmerritt_archive@protonmail.com. The subject line read simply, "You were right to dig." Inside the email was a single line of text and a coordinate string, 39.9195 degrees north, 118.1704 degrees west, beneath the concrete. Mendoza stared at it, pulse hammering. The coordinates pointed to a stretch of abandoned service road 20 miles east of Lovelock, near a defunct way station. She forwarded the message to her supervisor, but by the time the department responded, she'd already gone. The site was desolate, wind slicing through rusted guardrails. The concrete pad mentioned in the message lay cracked and faded, remnants of a parking lot long since reclaimed by sand. She swept the area with a metal detector from her trunk, moving slowly, methodically. After 30 minutes, the device chirped weakly. She knelt, brushed aside dust, and struck metal. 6 inches beneath the surface lay a corroded lunchbox. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of photographs and a cassette tape labeled Merritt March 1st. The photographs were black and white prints of the same motel from the tapes. In one image, Sims stood beside a van marked SafeSpan Field Unit. The side door was open, revealing equipment, tripods, cables, and something else, a large plastic drum identical to the one where the reels had been found. Mendoza drove straight back to the sheriff's office. The tape was digitized within hours. The recording began with static, then a man's voice, Merritt's. Nervous, breathing hard. "If anyone finds this," he said, "they're using the training sites. It's not drills. It's not what they say. I saw Cooper, he's got them in the rooms. Sims knows. They all know. They're recording it." A pause. "I'm leaving this where I think they buried the first one. If I don't come back, tell someone." The tape cut off mid-sentence. That was enough for the state to reopen the SafeSpan investigation formally. News broke within hours. Reporters swarmed Pershing County again, resurrecting old headlines, drawing lines between Emily Hart and a wider network of disappearances across Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. The press dubbed it the corridor cases. Under mounting pressure, the state convened a joint task force. Mendoza was reinstated as lead investigator. For weeks, she worked out of a temporary operations trailer near the old way station, reviewing every SafeSpan and Desert Watch record recovered. The film reels became key evidence. Their frames matched to missing person timelines across counties. The blindfolded woman from the footage was identified through facial recognition as Melissa Dunn, the Elko clerk who'd vanished in 1999. Her remains were found 2 months later, buried outside the same training facility where the reels had been stored. Dental records confirmed the match. It was the final link in a chain spanning nearly a decade of silence. But what haunted Mendoza most wasn't the victims, it was Sims. He died in 2015 of natural causes, leaving behind a storage unit in Reno. When investigators searched it, they found more reels, neatly catalogued and labeled by date. Dozens of them. Some contained only footage of empty motel lobbies or parking lots at night. Others, still sealed, bore handwritten notes like Test Sequence A or 214 Prototype. One note simply read Cooper, Final. Each reel carried the same blurred emblem, the silver star encircled by text. When enhanced digitally, the words finally became legible. They read, SafeSpan Federal Contract Division. Federal. Mendoza froze at the implication. SafeSpan hadn't been merely a private contractor, it had government clients. Possibly law enforcement partnerships. The company's classified subcontract work, buried under non-disclosure agreements, had given its personnel near total immunity. Cooper and Sims had operated in that shadow, using legitimate authority as camouflage. The deeper she dug, the more it felt like standing on the edge of a pit with no bottom. Some of the files she requested came back redacted. Others vanished from databases entirely. When she pressed a contact at the Attorney General's office for clarification, he warned her off. You start pulling at threads like that, he said, you'll find things that don't fit in your report. And no one will thank you for it. But Mendoza couldn't stop. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all federal security contracts issued to SafeSpan between 1997 and 2001. 3 weeks later, she received a single page in response, all information classified under national security exemptions. The final line read, disclosure would compromise active investigations. Active. She stared at the word until it blurred. If there were active investigations, it meant someone still operated under the SafeSpan model. New name, new logo, same structure. The pattern wasn't dead. It had evolved. That night, as she locked the evidence vault, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. A voice on the line spoke softly, deliberate. Detective Mendoza, it said, you should stop. Looking backward. You won't like where it leads. The line went dead. She stood there for a long time, listening to the dial tone fade. The wind outside howled through the cracks in the window frame. Somewhere far out on the highway, a truck horn echoed once, then was gone. The next morning, she found a manila envelope slipped under her office door. No markings, no postage. Inside was a single photograph, a recent shot of her apartment building, taken at night. Her window lights glowing. Across the bottom, in handwritten ink, you're looking in the wrong direction. Mendoza didn't flinch. She slid the photo into an evidence sleeve, logged it under threats, ongoing investigation, and continued her report. Fear had no place left to grow. She'd learned that from Emily Hart, from every woman who'd vanished because someone told them to trust the wrong uniform. She opened a new file on her desktop and titled it the Corridor Report. It would document everything: SafeSpan, Desert Watch, Sims, Cooper, Merritt, the tapes, the calls, the silence. If no one else would keep the record straight, she would. The desert outside was still and endless. In its quiet, she heard the echo of Merritt's voice from the tape. They're using the training sites. It's not what they say. And in that moment, Mendoza understood that the story she'd been chasing all these years wasn't about a single killer or a single night at a motel. It was about the machinery that allowed men like Cooper to exist at all. The system that turned predation into procedure. The case was no longer just cold. It was buried under layers of authority, each colder than the last. And somewhere, she knew, the desert was still holding secrets that hadn't yet decided to stay buried. By spring 2024, Pershing County was a place split between memory and denial. The motel was gone, scraped to dust by state order, Yet visitors still parked on the shoulder at mile marker 143 to photograph the void where it once stood. News vans came and went. The corridor cases had become national shorthand for a decade of disappearances that the justice system had ignored, a cautionary parable about the cost of complacency. Detective Kara Mendoza's name appeared in every article, sometimes as hero, sometimes as obsessive. She read none of them. Her focus was the report. The corridor report had grown to 600 pages, interviews, photographs, cross-state payroll data, vehicle manifests, and still frames from the SafeSpan films. It no longer fit in a single binder. It had become a map of something that should never have existed, an unbroken chain of exploitation running through rural infrastructure, camouflaged by bureaucracy and dust. The state attorney general called her to Carson City for a final briefing. The meeting room smelled of coffee and printer toner. A half-dozen officials sat behind a polished table, faces gray with fatigue. "We've reviewed your findings," the deputy AG said. "You've done impressive work. But the federal connections complicate jurisdiction. The Department of Justice will take over from here." "You're closing it," Mendoza said flatly. "We're integrating it," the deputy corrected. "This will move to a higher level where it belongs." She recognized the language of containment. Her report would be buried under classification stamps and forgotten. She slid a copy of the film stills across the table. "There are victims in other states. They deserve names." The deputy sighed. "We'll do what we can." When Mendoza left the building, she didn't go home. She drove south, past Fallon, past the dry lake beds and derelict billboards, until the desert swallowed cell reception. At a turnout near the base of the Humboldt Range, she pulled over and watched the wind push curtains of sand across the highway. The horizon shimmered like a mirage. She thought of Emily Hart, of Melissa Dunn, of the women whose names she didn't yet know. The desert had held them all, quiet, patient, unforgiving. She opened her trunk and removed a small metal lockbox. Inside were 2 USB drives, one containing the official case archive, the other an encrypted mirror of everything the state hadn't wanted. She buried them beneath a cairn of stones, marked only by a flat piece of metal etched with her initials. If the truth was ever erased from servers, it would still exist here, in the desert that had seen everything. In June, Mendoza returned to work on unrelated assignments: ranch theft, water rights disputes, routine small-town crimes that felt strangely innocent after what she'd seen. The department avoided mentioning SafeSpan. When she passed the evidence vault, the sealed crates labeled corridor cases sat untouched, dust thick on the lids. Then in August, an envelope arrived at her desk with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a federal procurement notice dated March 2024, 3 months old. The contract listed a private security vendor awarded a logistic surveillance bid for highway rest areas across Nevada and Utah. The company name, SpanSafe Solutions, LLC. The registered agent, G. Sims Jr. The signature was unmistakable. She closed her eyes. SafeSpan reborn, 1 generation later. New letterhead, same skeleton. The system never died, it just rebranded faster than people could remember. That evening she met with Daniel Kerr, the reporter who'd once written about Merritt's disappearance. They sat in a Reno diner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the clatter of cutlery filling pauses. She slid the procurement notice across the table. "They're back," she said. Kerr read it twice, then leaned back, exhaling. "You realize publishing this could get us both sued into oblivion." "Only if we name names." He studied her. "You really think it's the same network?" "I don't think," she said. "I know patterns. Patterns don't lie." They agreed to collaborate quietly. Kerr would dig through corporate filings and subcontractor rosters. Mendoza would trace the licensing paperwork through the state database. Within weeks, connections began to surface: identical post office boxes, recycled employee IDs, even reused vehicle registration numbers. Someone had taken the entire SafeSpan infrastructure and dressed it in a new uniform. In September, Kerr's preliminary story leaked online through an independent journalism outlet. The headline read, "SpanSafe, the return of Nevada's shadow security." It trended for 48 hours before disappearing from search engines. The link redirected to an error page. The outlet's Twitter account was suspended. Kerr's phone went dark. Mendoza drove to his apartment in Reno. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights were off, the air heavy with dust. His laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, its screen frozen on a government login portal requiring multi-factor authentication. His phone lay beside it, battery removed. The only sound was the refrigerator humming. She called his name twice. No response. The police report filed later that night listed no sign of struggle. Kerr's car was still in the garage. The only item missing was a black USB drive labeled SafeSpan Investigation. Mendoza sat in her car until dawn, watching the sun crawl over the Sierras. Another disappearance. Another silence. She filed the report herself, though every word felt like repetition of a pattern she already knew by heart. Weeks later, she received a call from an unlisted number. A man's voice, low and calm. He's not dead. He's quiet. For now. Who is this? You're still looking in the wrong direction. Then the line disconnected. That phrase again, the same handwriting on the photograph left at her door months earlier. Whoever they were, they had reach, and they wanted her to know it. She doubled her precautions: new locks, offline backups, encrypted drives hidden in different counties. Yet the investigation continued to pull her back. She learned that SpanSafe's contract included a clause for experimental monitoring technology developed under federal partnership. The language was identical to a clause in SafeSpan's 1999 agreements. History repeating itself word for word. By December, her notes filled another binder. She called it Continuity of Silence. Its conclusion was simple: the network had survived because it was useful. Men like Cooper had been disposable tools, not anomalies. The true machine ran on contracts, not crimes. On the night of December 14th, Mendoza parked at mile marker 143 again. Snow flurried across the asphalt, thin as ash. She left her car idling and walked to the memorial light, now dim with age. For a moment, the wind fell still. In that silence, she heard what she'd come to understand as the only constant in her work: not closure, but persistence. She took out her recorder and spoke softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. Case file supplemental, entry 213. The system regenerates itself. For every face we expose, another steps forward wearing the same uniform. The desert remembers, even when the files don't. She turned off the recorder, slid it into her pocket, and stared at the horizon until the first light of morning touched the sand. The sun rose slow and red, painting the landscape the color of rusted evidence tags. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of jurisdiction and memory, the truth was still moving, quiet, patient, unhurried. Like the desert itself. And Mendoza, though exhausted, knew she would keep following it. Because stories like Emily Hart's didn't end. They waited, just beneath the surface, until someone was willing to dig again. We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel.